I always hated the sound of church bells. Something about their hollow, drawn-out chimes made my stomach twist. On the morning of my parents' funeral, those bells rang through St. Augustine's Cathedral in Charleston, South Carolina, as if they were mocking me, reminding me that this chapter of my life was closing, and the people who had always protected me were never coming back. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 27 years old. I teach second grade at a public elementary school just north of Charleston. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Mount Pleasant, and up until 2 months ago, my life was simple. I loved my students, I loved my quiet life, and I adored my parents. We weren't rich, but we were close. Family dinners every Sunday. Long phone calls with my mom while I walked home from work. My dad's dry jokes that always made me laugh even when I didn't want to. I would have done anything for them. And then the accident happened. They were driving back from a weekend trip to Asheville when a semi crossed the center line and hit them head-on. I was in the middle of a lesson about plant life cycles when the school secretary knocked on my classroom door, her face pale and stricken. I don't remember what I said to my students. I don't remember grabbing my purse or getting in the car. All I remember is standing in that sterile hospital hallway with my older sister, Rachel, the two of us side by side but miles apart in every other way, as the doctor told us they didn't make it. Rachel was the golden child. Always had been. For years older, prettier, more poised, more ambitious. She worked in real estate and had this shiny life that sparkled on Instagram: perfect husband, perfect house in Charlotte, perfect everything. I always felt like the scrappy little sister tagging along. While she wore designer heels, I wore comfortable flats. While she hosted cocktail parties, I brought homemade cookies to bake sales. But despite our differences, I thought we were still family. I thought we'd come together after losing mom and dad. I thought wrong. The funeral was packed. My parents were loved, pillars of the community. My dad was a retired high school principal, my mom had run a small antique shop downtown. People cried, people brought casseroles, people said kind things. Rachel did most of the talking. She was always good at that, taking charge, looking composed, saying just the right thing in just the right tone. I stood by, quiet, hurting, nodding politely at the endless stream of condolences. I didn't even realize something was wrong until 2 days later. We were sitting in our parents' living room. The house was quiet, too quiet. I was flipping through a photo album, tears threatening to spill, when Rachel walked in with a folder in her hand and that look on her face, the one that always meant she had something important to say and I was supposed to listen. "I wanted to talk to you about the will," she said. I looked up, confused. "What about it?" She sat down across from me. Crossed her legs. Rested the folder in her lap. "Mom and Dad updated their will last year. They left the house and most of the estate to me." I blinked. "What?" She opened the folder and handed me a copy. "They said you were doing fine on your own, that you had a stable job and didn't need much. They wanted the bulk of the inheritance to go to someone who could really use it to grow something. They trusted me with that." I stared at the paper in disbelief. Legalese blurred in front of my eyes. This can't be right. Mom told me last Christmas she was leaving the house to both of us. She said she wanted it to stay in the family. Rachel gave a sad smile. "People change their minds, Em. You know that." "No," I said, my voice rising. "No, this doesn't make sense. Why would they cut me out like this?" She leaned forward, that same condescending tone I'd heard my entire life. "Emily, you're a teacher. You make a living. You don't have student loans anymore. You live modestly. They probably just thought I needed it more. Don't make this ugly." "Ugly?" My hands were trembling. "You're telling me our parents are barely in the ground and you're handing me legal documents saying I get nothing, and I'm the one making it ugly?" She shrugged. "I'm just doing what they wanted." But I knew. My parents would never do that to me. Especially not my mom. She was the one who always encouraged me to go into teaching, who said it was noble work, who proudly framed every Christmas card my students made for me. They would never disinherit me, not unless something had happened. Not unless someone made it happen. But Rachel didn't give me time to process. Within a week, she had the house cleaned out and listed. The antique store was sold off quietly to a corporate buyer from Atlanta. All of it, gone. The memories, the history, the legacy, liquidated into profit. And I was left with nothing but a few boxes of books and the ache in my chest. I went back to work the following Monday, pretending everything was fine. My coworkers offered sympathy. My students asked sweet questions. I smiled. I taught. I held it together. But at night, I cried myself to sleep in my tiny apartment, haunted by the feeling that something had been stolen from me, and I had let it happen. Then one night, 3 weeks after the funeral, I got a call from Aunt Marion, my mom's older sister. She lived in Wilmington, North Carolina, and hadn't been able to attend the funeral because of surgery. We talked for a while, about the weather, about how I was holding up, and then she asked, casually, "Did Rachel tell you about the letter your mom left you?" I froze. "What letter?" There was a pause. "Oh. I just assumed she gave it to you. Your mom told me she was leaving you a personal letter in the safe with the updated will. Said it explained a few things." "There was no letter," I said, my voice flat. Another pause. "Oh, honey, that was the moment everything changed." That night, I drove back to Charleston and broke into my parents' old house. It hadn't sold yet, but Rachel had changed the locks. Luckily, I still had the back door key hidden in the potted fern behind the porch. My heart pounded as I crept inside and made my way to the safe in Dad's study. The combination hadn't changed. And when I opened it, beneath the will and a few bank documents, I found it. A sealed envelope. My name on the front, written in Mom's handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. And what I read shattered me, and lit a fire I never knew I had. The letter was only 2 pages long, but it felt like it held the weight of my entire life. I sat on the cold hardwood floor of my parents' study, the safe door hanging open, my mother's voice echoing in my mind as I read her final words. "My sweet Emily, if you're reading this, then something has happened, and I'm so sorry I'm not there to explain in person. I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've always been the heart of this family, even when it didn't feel that way. You chose a path of kindness and purpose, and I admire you more than words can express. About the will, we never meant to exclude you. The house, the store, and everything else were always going to be shared equally between you and Rachel. That's how your father and I wrote it. If things changed, then something went very wrong. Please be strong, and trust your instincts. You always see the truth, even when others can't. Don't let anyone make you feel small. I love you forever, Mom." I sat there frozen, tears sliding silently down my cheeks, clutching that letter like a lifeline. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being dramatic. My mother never intended to leave me out. Rachel had lied. She hadn't just manipulated the situation, she had committed fraud. She'd taken advantage of their deaths, altered the will somehow, and stolen what was meant to be mine. And the worst part? She had looked me in the eyes and told me it was for the best. Like I was being unreasonable. Like I was greedy. My breath came fast, my heart racing. I'd always known Rachel was self-centered and calculating. But I hadn't realized she was capable of this. That night, I took the letter and photocopied it at a 24-hour print shop, then drove back to Mount Pleasant with one copy safely hidden in my apartment and the original tucked inside my sock drawer. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mind spun with fury and disbelief. How had she done it? Could a will even be changed without both parents agreeing? Did she forge their signatures? Bribe a lawyer? I didn't have proof yet, but I was going to find it. And I was going to make sure Rachel paid for every lie she told and every dollar she stole. The next morning, I called Alan Prescott, the family attorney who had handled my parents' estate for years. He had an office downtown, just off Broad Street, and I'd known him since I was a teenager. I pretended it was a routine follow-up. "Hi Alan, it's Emily Carter. I was hoping to get a certified copy of my parents' most recent will for my records." He sounded surprised. "I thought Rachel already gave you everything?" "She did," I said smoothly, "but I'd feel better having my own copy. Just for peace of mind." He hesitated. "Well, sure. I'll email it over." 15 minutes later, I had the file. I opened the PDF, scanning every line. As Rachel had said, the entire estate had been left to her: home, antique shop, cash savings. There was no mention of me at all, not even as a backup beneficiary. It looked legitimate. Too legitimate. But then I noticed the date at the top, March 4th, just 2 weeks before my parents' fatal car accident. A chill ran through me. They had been in Asheville that weekend, celebrating their 35th anniversary. I remembered Mom sending me photos of the cabin, the vineyards, the lake. Why would they be meeting with a lawyer in Charleston on the same day? I checked the signature page. The witnesses were names I didn't recognize: Derek Krantz and Mira Jensen. No law firm letterhead. Just Alan's digital signature at the bottom. Something about it felt off. I called Aunt Marion again and told her everything. She listened quietly, and when I finished, she said, "Sweetheart, I think you need to get a second opinion. A real one." So I did. That afternoon, I met with Samantha Voss, an estate attorney in Mount Pleasant recommended by a friend. I showed her the will, the letter, and the questions I had. Her brow furrowed as she read through the documents. "This isn't right," she muttered. "There's no mention of an original will or revocation. No mention of a trust or prior distributions. And these witness names, they're not registered paralegals or notaries in South Carolina. Can she forge a will like this and get away with it?" I asked. Samantha looked up, serious. "If this was filed improperly, or if it can be proven the signatures were faked or coerced, then yes, it can be contested. But you'd need real proof. Preferably something from a third party or someone who knew the original terms." "My mom's letter," I said quickly. "Doesn't that count?" "It helps. A lot. But it's not legal proof on its own. What you need is the original will. Or evidence that this one was manipulated." I left her office more determined than ever. Over the next week, I launched a quiet investigation. I went through every old document I had, trying to find anything about the original will. I even contacted the bank manager at my parents' branch in Charleston, posing as someone checking account beneficiaries. They wouldn't tell me much, but the manager slipped up and said, "As far as I know, both daughters were listed last year before the trust changed." Before the trust changed. That was the clue I needed. Rachel hadn't just altered a will. She had changed the trust, and that meant financial documentation existed somewhere. I started digging into property records. I learned that the house had been transferred from the Carter family trust to Rachel Carter Morris just 8 days after the funeral. The antique store was sold off in a cash deal through a shell LLC registered in Rachel's husband's name. She had moved fast. Too fast. As if it had all been planned before our parents even died. And then, I got my break. While scrolling through Rachel's husband's Instagram, he was a luxury lifestyle guy, all boats and cufflinks and motivational quotes. I found a photo dated March 4th, the same day the will had supposedly been signed. It was of the two of them wine tasting in Napa Valley, California. Not South Carolina. The caption read, "Anniversary escape with my queen. Charleston can wait." They hadn't even been in the state the day the will was signed. I screenshotted everything. Then I called Samantha. She filed the paperwork to formally contest the will and requested a court injunction to freeze any remaining estate assets before Rachel could move them again. Rachel was served at her home in Charlotte 2 days later. She called me, screaming, "You're sick, Emily. You're trying to sue your own sister over a misunderstanding? You committed fraud, I said coldly. You forged a will. I have proof. There was a beat of silence. Then, in the most venomous voice I've ever heard her use, she hissed, "You're going to regret this." Click. The storm had begun. Rachel wasn't going to give up without a fight. But neither was I. She took our parents from me. She tried to take my memories, my family, my peace. Now I was going to take everything from her. One piece at a time. Rachel was always good at faking perfection. To the outside world, she was a devoted wife, a poised businesswoman, and a picture-perfect daughter who stepped up after our parents' tragic deaths. Her Instagram was a gallery of yacht brunches and designer handbags, filled with glowing comments from people who didn't know the truth. But now that the will contest was public, the mask started to slip. Samantha, my attorney, filed an emergency petition to subpoena all related documents, bank statements, notary logs, communications with the family lawyer, and even the property sale records tied to our parents' estate. Rachel and her husband, Blake Morris, were furious. Their lawyer tried to delay the process, claiming it was a family matter, but the judge, bless her heart, saw through it. "This appears to be a clear case of potential fraud and undue influence," she said in court. "If Ms. Carter's claims are valid, then this matter deserves full transparency." Rachel was there, sitting across from me in her overpriced heels and stiff designer blazer, lips pressed into a thin smile. When the judge made her ruling, her jaw clenched so hard I thought she might chip a tooth. I didn't look away. I wanted her to know, I was done playing the quiet sister. That same week, Samantha hired a private forensic document analyst named Dr. Elise Monroe. She specialized in handwriting authentication and signature forensics. We sent her copies of the signed will, comparing it to previous documents signed by my parents. 2 weeks later, her report came in. There is a high probability that the signatures on the March 4th will were not authored by the individuals they purport to represent. In other words, they were forged. Samantha nearly danced around her office when she read the line. This was gold. But it still wasn't enough. To win, we needed to prove intent. That Rachel knew what she was doing, and had orchestrated the whole thing. We needed someone who had been close to her at the time. And that's when I remembered Chelsea Porter, Rachel's former assistant at the antique store. She'd quit suddenly 3 months after our parents' funeral. Back then, I thought she'd just moved on. Now, I wasn't so sure. I tracked her down through LinkedIn and messaged her. To my surprise, she replied the same day, "Emily, I've been waiting for this message." We met at a small cafe off King Street, one of those cozy Charleston places with creaky wood floors and too many plants. Chelsea looked older than I remembered, tired but sharper. When I sat down, she didn't waste time. "I should have spoken up months ago," she said, fingers curling around her coffee cup. But I was scared. "Rachel made me sign an NDA when I left the shop." "Why?" I asked. She exhaled. "Because I found the draft will in her desk drawer a month before your parents died." My stomach dropped. "She told me she was helping your mom tidy up paperwork. But it was weird, the signatures weren't there yet. Then a few weeks later, your parents died. And suddenly she told me she inherited everything and that I wasn't needed at the store anymore." Chelsea looked around, then leaned in. I think she had it ready. Like she was waiting for something to happen. She was paranoid, secretive. She took the store books home and made me run everything through her new finance guy. I didn't feel right about it. "Would you be willing to testify?" I asked. "I have copies," she whispered. "And email screenshots." From her old laptop, I backed everything up when she made me transfer store files. Proof. Real, tangible proof. She slid me a flash drive. I almost cried right there. Back at Samantha's office, we plugged it in and found it all, draft versions of the will with metadata showing they were created by Rachel, not my parents. Emails where Rachel discussed timing the trust transfer with her husband. A typed memo she'd written called, "Next Steps After Transfer," that listed things like change locks, empty joint accounts, and, chillingly, "Emily, offer small buyout if she complains." They had planned it all. Our petition for fraudulent conveyance and inheritance theft was amended immediately. Samantha also requested a criminal investigation. Rachel's response? She doubled down. On her Instagram, she posted a lengthy story about being betrayed by someone I love, with a photo of her in tears and hashtags like #familypain and #staystrong. I almost laughed. Then she started calling our extended family, spinning the narrative that I was mentally unstable and obsessed with revenge. Aunt Marian didn't buy it, thank God, but some cousins did. One even messaged me, asking if I was having another breakdown. Rachel knew exactly how to twist the truth. She always had. But what she didn't realize was that every move she made only proved my case. Then came the court-mandated deposition. Rachel sat across from Samantha and me in a great conference room, her lawyer beside her. She wore all white, like some fallen angel. She smiled sweetly and lied through her teeth. I don't know how that will was created. My parents must have decided to change things last minute. They always said they wanted to reward the daughter who stayed close. Samantha slid the flash drive across the table. Can you explain these files, specifically the draft will created on your home computer before your parents' deaths? Or the memo detailing how to isolate and financially cut off your sister? Rachel went pale. Her lawyer jumped in. Objection, these were obtained outside of discovery, they were turned over voluntarily by a former employee of Ms. Carter Morris. A whistleblower, Samantha said, calm as ever. And she's willing to testify under oath. Rachel said nothing. For once, she had no script. After that, things moved fast. The judge granted a temporary freeze on the Morris LLC accounts tied to the estate transfer. We were granted access to full financial records. The IRS was flagged about the suspicious gift transaction involving the antique store sale. And then, the biggest blow of all, Blake, Rachel's husband, was arrested for tax evasion and wire fraud tied to the estate assets. Turns out, he'd used offshore accounts to hide the profit from the store's sale. Someone at the IRS had been watching. Rachel was next. She wasn't arrested, not yet. But her assets were seized, her accounts locked, and her social circle began to shrink like melting ice. The sister who once walked into country clubs with her head high was now reduced to angry, bitter rants on Facebook. And I was just getting started. I moved back into our childhood home, not because I needed to, but because I wanted Rachel to know that I had reclaimed it. The front porch was overgrown, the roof needed work, and the wallpaper in the foyer was still that awful rose pattern Mom loved. But it was mine now. It felt like a heartbeat beneath my feet. Aunt Marian brought over a pie the first night. You did good, honey, she said, hugging me. They'd be proud. I wanted to believe that. I think I finally did. But deep down, I knew something else, Rachel wasn't done yet. She had too much pride, too much poison left. And I could feel it coming. One last move. One last twist. But this time, I'd be ready. I thought the worst of it was over. Blake was under federal investigation. Rachel's assets were frozen. The antique store had officially been returned to me by court order, and we were days away from the final inheritance ruling. For the first time in over a year, I felt like I could breathe. That peace lasted exactly 48 hours. I was in the kitchen of our old family home, unpacking boxes of heirloom china I found in Mom's attic, when my phone buzzed. A private number. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something told me to answer. Emily Carter? A deep voice asked. Yes? This is Detective Howard Richards with Charleston PD. We need you to come down to the station. My blood turned to ice. Why? You've been named in a formal complaint. Allegations of identity theft and financial fraud. We'd like to hear your side of the story. Samantha nearly broke the sound barrier getting to the station. Rachel had filed a criminal complaint against me. She claimed I'd hacked into her email, manipulated documents, and fabricated evidence during the will contest. According to her, I was the fraud. She even accused me of coercing her former employee, Chelsea, into lying. She didn't just want to win. She wanted to ruin me completely. I knew she'd try something desperate, Samantha muttered as we walked into the station. But this? This is scorched earth. I gave my statement under counsel. Calm. Direct. We submitted all documentation proving that Chelsea had come forward on her own. We also turned over a signed affidavit from Dr. Monroe verifying the will forgeries, again. But Rachel had pulled one last trick. She submitted a fake voice recording. It was clearly me, at least, it sounded like me, telling Chelsea, "I don't care if it's illegal. Just say Rachel forged the will. I'll pay you $10,000. I was floored. I had never said those words. Samantha requested a voice analysis. Turns out, it was AI generated. Someone had scraped hours of my voice from social media videos I posted years ago about the antique shop and spliced them into a fake confession. Rachel was now dabbling in deepfakes. The police flagged the audio as inconclusive pending forensic review, but the damage was already done. The accusation made headlines in the Charleston Courier, sister accused in ongoing inheritance war, new twist in Carter family saga, and Rachel? She fed the press like a starving wolf. She gave an interview on a local podcast, crying about how she had always protected Emily and never wanted any of this. She's spiraling, Rachel said. She needs help. I just hope the truth comes out before she destroys herself. She even included a Bible quote. God, she was good. But while Rachel was busy playing martyr in the media, she made a fatal mistake. She forgot about Blake. While awaiting his formal indictment, he struck a deal with federal prosecutors. The feds offered leniency in exchange for full transparency about his and Rachel's financial dealings, including the estate transfer, the offshore accounts, and yes, the forged will. And Blake? He sang like a damn canary. His sworn deposition blew Rachel's entire scheme wide open. He admitted they'd created multiple versions of the will, consulted with a shady paralegal friend to bypass notary requirements, and even faked a series of emails between my parents to make it look like they'd changed their minds. And the AI voice recording? Blake admitted it was his idea. He paid a digital freelancer on the dark web to create it after Rachel panicked about Chelsea's testimony. With Blake's confession in hand, the Charleston PD dropped Rachel's complaint against me. But I wasn't done. Not even close. We amended our civil suit to include defamation, malicious prosecution, and emotional distress. Samantha also filed a motion to have Rachel held in contempt of court for fabricating evidence. At the hearing, Rachel finally cracked. For the first time, her voice trembled. She didn't wear designer. Her roots were showing. She looked small. This wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered to the judge. I didn't want to lose everything. You chose to take everything, I said, standing beside my lawyer. Even things that weren't yours. And now? I was taking it all back. The judge ruled in our favor on every count. The will was declared fraudulent. The original terms of my parents' estate were restored, split equally between Rachel and me. But since she had already sold half the assets and siphoned funds illegally, I was granted full ownership of the family home, the antique shop, and compensatory damages of over $1.2 million. The judge also referred Rachel's behavior to the state bar for potential criminal charges. She was officially bankrupt. And alone. After the ruling, I drove past her house in the upscale neighborhood of Harleston Village. A for sale sign stood in the front yard. I watched through the windshield as Rachel stood on the porch, arguing with a moving company. Her perfect life, packed in boxes. She looked up and saw me. For a second, I expected her to flip me off, scream, beg. But she didn't. She just looked tired. Like someone who'd lost the only game she knew how to play. And maybe, just maybe, she finally realized she'd burned her kingdom down with her own hands. The antique store reopened 6 weeks later. We renamed it Carter and Company. Vintage and held a soft launch event that drew over 100 people. Aunt Marion cut the ribbon. Chelsea came back as manager, and we started donating 10% of profits to a foundation in my parents' name. It wasn't just a store anymore. It was a symbol. A restoration. One evening, after closing, I walked to the back office and opened the old ledger. My mother's handwriting was still there, neat and careful, listing vintage teacups and garden statues like they were precious gems. I ran my fingers over the ink and whispered, "It's ours again." But something inside me still hadn't settled. A final letter arrived a few days later. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. It was from Rachel. "Emily, you got what you wanted. I hope it makes you feel whole. I'm leaving Charleston. You'll never hear from me again. But just know, one day you'll realize not everything can be fixed with revenge." I folded the letter and put it in the back of the ledger. She was wrong. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. And sometimes, it takes fire to rebuild something worth saving. A year passed. Sometimes I still woke up thinking I had dreamt the whole thing. The court battles. The headlines. The betrayal. The day Rachel's voice broke in court. It had all happened so fast, but the scars were slow. The antique shop was thriving. We had 2 part-time employees now, a website with a growing customer base, and regular shipments coming in from estate sales across South Carolina and Georgia. Charleston embraced Carter and Company. Vintage like it had always been here. But I knew better. It had to be rebuilt from nothing. From betrayal. From grief. From ashes. One warm morning in May, I was restocking the glass cabinet with a new set of Depression-era pink glassware when I saw a familiar face at the door. Chelsea buzzed her in. I stood frozen. It was Rachel. She looked different. Her hair was shorter. She wore no makeup. Her clothes were clean but plain, an off-brand denim jacket and tan flats, the kind of outfit she used to make fun of. We stood there in silence. The last time I saw her, she was packing boxes under a foreclosure sign. Now she stood in my store. The store she tried to erase me from. "I'm not here to start anything," she said, hands up. "Then why are you here?" I asked, cautiously. She swallowed. "To give you this." She held out an envelope. Thick. Heavy. "I sold the house," she said. "What little I had left after the legal fees, I put in a trust. This is a check for part of your share. What I owe you." I blinked. The court already ruled. "You don't owe me anything anymore." "I know," she said, voice cracking. "But I do. I took things that weren't mine. I lied to the police. I lied to Blake. I lied to myself. I didn't take the envelope right away. I didn't say a word." She glanced around the store, her eyes softening as they landed on an old porcelain angel from our childhood, tucked into a corner display. "Mom would have loved what you did here," she said. A pause. "Tell her I said hi," she added, half joking, half not. Then she turned and left. I didn't cash the check. I tucked it into my father's old Bible, the one he used to read on the porch in the evenings while sipping sweet tea. I wasn't sure if I'd ever cash it. Because money couldn't fix what was broken. But maybe, Rachel had started the process of healing, in her own twisted way. That summer, Aunt Marion and I took a road trip to Asheville. We hiked in the Blue Ridge Mountains, stayed in a cabin, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. On the last night, we sat by a fire pit. She pulled out 2 glasses and a bottle of my mother's favorite port. "To your parents," she said, raising her glass. "To forgiveness," I replied quietly. She looked at me for a long second. "You forgave her?" she asked. I sighed. Not entirely. But I'm not carrying her anymore. That weight, it was crushing me. And it didn't belong to me. She nodded. You're stronger than her, Emily. And you always were. I spent the fall writing a book. Not a bestseller, not some tell-all. Just a memoir, privately published, shared only with friends and family, called The Inheritance of Fire. It was raw. Personal. Honest. I wrote about my parents, the betrayal, the ugly court days, and the moment I stood in my mother's store again, knowing I had won without becoming like Rachel. It helped me breathe again. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, something strange happened. I got a letter in the mail. Not from Rachel. Not from Blake. It was from a woman named Melissa James, an attorney in Atlanta. She introduced herself as the executor of a trust fund created by Blake's ex-wife, who had quietly filed for divorce during his criminal trial. Apparently, Blake had left behind a sizable personal art collection, and before going to prison, he signed it over to his daughter from his first marriage. That daughter? She wanted nothing to do with it. Melissa was instructed to donate the collection or offer it to someone who had once been harmed by Blake's lies. And that person was me. Inside the package were photos. Dozens of rare paintings and sculptures. Items that could turn Carter and Company vintage into a regional gallery overnight. I sat on the floor, flipping through images of oil portraits and early American folk art, stunned. From destruction, opportunity. It didn't erase the pain. But it honored the journey. The last time I heard from Rachel was a Christmas card. No return address, just a wax seal with the letter R inside, a photo of her and 2 dogs in front of a small crafts store in Vermont. She wore a wool beanie and held a mug that said New Beginnings. She wrote 3 words. I'm still sorry. That was it. And for the first time in 2 years, I didn't cry when I saw her handwriting. I smiled. The truth is, sometimes revenge doesn't look like flames and fury. Sometimes it looks like peace. Like freedom. Like rebuilding a life that was stolen from you, and making it better than the thief could ever imagine. Rachel tried to burn my life to the ground. But in the ashes, I found something she never had. Grace.